Good morning, everybody. This is a regularly scheduled meeting of Board of Fire Commissioners. The date is Tuesday, February 19th, 2019, and the time is about 9:03.
Let the record reflect Commissioners Ibarra, Glacier, Nimberg, and Woods Gray are present, and we have a quorum. Madam President.
Thank you. Flag salute, moment of silence.
Right hand over your heart. Ready? Begin.
Pledge allegiance to the flag.
Please join me in a moment of silence in honor of past and present members of the Los Angeles Fire Department who devote their lives to the protection of our community. Thank you.
So we start with Commissioner comments.
Oh, good morning.
Good morning.
I did have the pleasure of participating in the Golden Dragon Parade. It turned out to be a great day. It rained in the morning a little bit, and then that afternoon we had a wonderful ride, and it was beautiful, well attended, and of course the fire department was well received. We had to stop the truck many times so people could take pictures, and especially the children. And Chief Flegel, who's not here, surprised he's not here, but he was quite popular. All the kids wanted to take pictures with him, so that was really good. So, and I remember the first time he rode on the truck in the parade, and that Saturday, I could see the growth, because the first time he had to ride on it was his first assignment. He had just been assigned, and it was very interesting. Anyway, it was I was happy to be able to be there and to participate in that process. I also went to the mayor's kickoff for Black History, and it was held at First AME Church, and we had the pleasure of having Chief Terrazas there, Chief Hogan, Chief Rideout, one other person I'm missing. I thought there were three. Was it? Oh, okay. And it was it's always well attended, and the mayor was there, and the mayor gave a great speech, and we had lots of other elected officials who attended that particular event. So it was great to have the fire department there, and the minister, Pastor Boyd, is always happy to see the fire department, and he was happy to see that we had more attendance. So we grow every year by one. So maybe by next year we'll add 4. That will be that third chief that I was thinking of, and we'll be well represented. But it's a great event for the public and for the community, and all the chiefs. I mean, the police chief is there, and everybody. So we were very happy to be represented among the group.
Just want to acknowledge Jackie Lacey, who just walked in. I think we have a presentation, perhaps. So moving on to reports to the fire chief.
Thank you, Madam President. The following are the events attended by the fire chief for the dates February 5th through February 18th. On February 7th, the fire chief attended the Homeland Security Advisory Council Distinguished Speaker Series event. The topic was the first 48 hours crisis in Ventura County, and this was a presentation by the former sheriff of Ventura County and the former mayor of Thousand Oaks, and it went over the events of the borderline shooting and also the subsequent Woolsey fire that happened within the next 48 hours. The presentation included a presentation by former Assistant Chief Andy Fox, who was mayor of Thousand Oaks during that period of time. Pretty enlightening, very emotional presentation, and there was a lot to be learned from that presentation. On February 8th, the fire chief attended a roundtable sponsored by the Fire Foundation, and the topic was how first responders are dealing with year-round fire conditions. This was in Century City. Well attended. The fire chief provided some insight to how we're staying ready year-round for all different incidents, from bush fires to floods to whatever comes at us. And that was very well received. And just like Commissioner Woods Gray said, the fire chief attended the African American Heritage Month celebration at the First AME Church on February 10th. Well attended, great event. He was glad to be there. And that's the end of my report.
Moving on to verbal report by the department on significant incidents from February 5th to February 18th.
Good morning,
Good morning.
Madam President, Commissioners, Chief Mathis. Al Poyer, Chief Deputy of Emergency Operations, for your emergency operations update for the 2-week period beginning February 5th. We often provide you with a detailed account or overview of specific emergency operations events. Today, I'd like to offer you an overview of those emergency operations, but also talk about some of the other things we do in emergency operations in the period since the last meeting. On February 5th, in an area that's near and dear to Commissioner Glazer, we had a 2-story vacant single-family dwelling at 1229 North Bronson Avenue, just south of Fountain. Resources were able to bring that fire under control, although it got into vegetation outside of the structure. It prevented it from damaging the structures around it. It was just across the street from LeConte Middle School, also there in Hollywood. That was about 7 p.m. on February the 5th. That same night, about 9 p.m. in Pacoima Mountain, Battalion 12 in Valley Bureau, we had a fire at McClay Middle School. Started on the outside and got inside the school, but in about 15 minutes we were able to bring it under control and confine it to just one room and prevent it from causing significant damage to that school, so the kids were able to resume school shortly thereafter. Commissioner Woods Gray mentioned the Golden Dragon Parade. Our Central Bureau resources participated in the Golden Dragon Parade along with Commissioner Dr. Hara and Phil Flegel, as she mentioned, the most youthful of our deputy chiefs, and he's popular with the kids. On February the 10th, a gentleman tried to take a watercraft from the Los Alamitos side of the coast across to Catalina and turned up missing. We joined our South Bureau resources, and one of our fireboats joined in the search for several hours. The watercraft was located, and tragically the rider of that watercraft was found, transported to hospital, and pronounced did not survive that event. But that's one of the examples of unified command with the Los Angeles County Fire Department, the United States Coast Guard, and other resources. When we and have an event that takes place off the coast, we combine our assets and resources and try and bring those things to a successful conclusion. We also hosted the Grammy Awards that night here in the city of Los Angeles at the Staples Center. We participated in developing the event action plan for that event, and we dedicate fire and EMS resources in the unified command posture with law enforcement in handling those events. On February the 12th, South Pasadena Fire Department requested mutual aid for a descending hillside home structure fire, one of the more dangerous, what we call low-frequency, high-risk events. And we were happy to provide mutual aid and assist South Pasadena Fire Department in bringing that fire under control. On February 13th, law enforcement partners from Los Angeles Police Department and Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department conducted widespread warrant operations across the city of Los Angeles and other areas in the county for transnational gang and drug activities. While we don't participate in the law enforcement side of that, we do provide tactical EMS and fast response vehicle personnel so that if any of the people being on the receiving end of the warrants or any of the law enforcement partners are injured during those operations, we can provide fast medical care to those people. On February 13th and 14th, we had rain. This has been the first real winter we've had in a while. And again, we augmented. Just like we do during the wildland weather that you see in September, October, November, December, we had rain events. So we participate in conference calls with the National Weather Service. We have internal weather partners, and we use a matrix and determine what the volume of rain is going to be for that specific event. And we augmented with swiftwater rescue teams, additional helicopter staff, and dozer operations and dozer operators for that period of time over those 2 days. On February 17th and 18th, over this past weekend, even though it is cold in Los Angeles, people still get out and use the Hollywood Hills and still get out and do some hiking. We had, just like we do many weekends, we had people get injured up in the hills, and we had hoist operations. 2 examples of that were Runyon Canyon, which is a very, very popular hiking spot in Hollywood. Steep terrain, very, very difficult when people get injured to bring them down on foot, so we end up hoisting, and we had a woman get injured with a fracture, and we're unable to bring her down with ground resources. We had to hoist, rescue her, and lower her to an area where we could then take her to the hospital. We also had a gentleman get trapped in the Big Tonga River, which has become more and more common, and we had to do a hoist operation to rescue that gentleman from the river as well this weekend. Yesterday, February the 18th, resources from Fire Station 28 in Porter Ranch responded to a reported shooting in a residential area up there, and tragically they located 3 victims of gunshot wounds that has been reported in the media that were all deceased, and LAPD is conducting an investigation for that, and we were in a unified command with LAPD for that event as well. That provides you with an overview of just the wide array of things that we respond to, and for perspective on the amazing work and the sheer volume that the men and women of this organization respond to. I'd like to just do a comparison for you. Santa Barbara County Fire Department, 2,500 square miles. They serve several 100,000 constituents. They respond to about 14,000 calls a year. Just in the 2 weeks since our last meeting, our folks have responded to over 19,000 emergency calls. They've transported over 8,300 people to the hospital and responded to 200 structure fire calls. And that concludes my report, unless you have questions.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Next, we have the verbal report from the medical director for the same time period.
Good morning, everyone. Dr. Mark Eckstein, Medical Director. Significant EMS incident since our last meeting. Physical rescue traffic accident. A few days ago in Fire Station 96 was first in on Plummer and DeSoto. T-bone accident. Sadly, 2 elderly patients were pronounced deceased on scene. An 8-year-old female was ejected with critical head injuries, and other patients were extricated and transported by our department. We had just kind of to touch on the theme of Chief Poyer in terms of down into the micro. I talk about the chain of survival every one of these presentations, and the steps that go in to saving a life out there is rather complex, and we say the strength of the weakest link in the chain is our vulnerabilities, and we focus and identify those all the time. And we've worked to strengthen that chain of survival for many, many years, and consequently our resuscitation rates have gone up considerably, and we engage the lay public in providing that first critical link. So along with that theme, and we're saving folks of every age. These aren't just elderly or infirm patients that you might suspect. On February 9th, up in the Mission Hills area, Engine Rescue 75 responded to a request for a 911 call at a community health clinic. They found a 64-year-old gentleman with chest pain. And in the back of the ambulance, the patient went into cardiac arrest. Rescue 75 was able to defibrillate the patient. He regained consciousness. They did a 12-lead EKG, which showed the patient was having a heart attack, or what we call a STEMI. He was transported to the nearest STEMI center and went immediately to the cath lab, expected to make a full recovery. On February 16th, Engine Rescue 33 responded on a 35-year-old female, also found in cardiac arrest. Our call takers at MFC, as they've been trained to do, particularly with the TDS, provided instructions for compression-only CPR, which was in progress upon Engine Rescue 33's arrival. They transitioned to basic and advanced cardiac life support, and also was able to achieve return of spontaneous circulation on this young woman. Finally, a phenomenal save at the airport a few days ago on February 12th at one of our remote terminals. 59-year-old gentleman, one of the many construction workers with the modernization project of the airport, went down in cardiac arrest, and we have approximately 100 defibrillators placed strategically throughout the entire LAX. Within the main terminals, we have defibrillators every 3 minutes walking distance, and we also have them at the remote terminals, which is important because that results usually in extended ETA for our resources to arrive. When Engine Rescue 51 arrived, the gentleman's coworkers had used one of our public access defibrillators. They had shocked their coworker a total of 6 times, and they were performing CPR. Engine Rescue 51 took over basic and advanced cardiac life support. They were able to not only achieve return of pulses of this gentleman, but he actually regained consciousness prior to transport. The gentleman was transported to UCLA, where he went to the cardiac cath lab, resulting in a phenomenal save. So again, we're saving lives out there, focusing on a very strong, each link in the chain of survival being very robust. And the critical link, again, is engaging the community, the public, to use defibrillators we've placed out there, defibrillators that are privately held, instructing bystanders to perform compression-only CPR, which makes a huge difference until they're turned over to the expertise of our men and women in the field. And that concludes my report. Thank you.
Thank you. So that concludes report from the department. Moving on to presentations.
Good morning, Commissioners,
Good
Chief
morning.
Mathis, City Attorney, Ms. Iniguez, Eric Scott, Fire Captain, Paramedic Public Information Officer. This morning we are going to recognize the LAFD Arson Counterterrorism House of Worship Task Force for a lengthy and collaborative investigation in a series of church vandalisms in the Los Angeles region since 2016. So it's important to know that this was the first time ever that multiple agencies outside the city of Los Angeles were included in resulting in this formation of the first ever LAFD interagency House of Worship Arson Task Force. And they led a unified and intensive investigation, which ultimately led to the capture and conviction of the criminal. So at this point, we'd like to ask the following members to please stand near the podium. Battalion Chief Michael Castillo, Captains Scott LaRue, Tim Holleran, investigators Mario Newt, Gus Gaeta with K9 Investigator Blue, arson forensic photographer Harry Garvin, and the three deputy district attorneys Joy Roberts, Holly Hapron, and Rachel Bowers. And first, to give a little bit of history behind all of this. In 1996, we formed the House of Worship Arson Task Force, and that was comprised of your LAFD, LAPD, ATF, and FBI. And they investigate all arson and hate crimes that related with fires that occur in a house of worship within the city of Los Angeles. But in 2016 is when a series of approximately 30 vandalisms began in the Los Angeles region, and that consisted of spray painting these churches, breaking statues, damaging religious artifacts, etc. But then in January of 2018, the suspect began damaging the churches utilizing fire, which it was his choice of weapon of destruction then. And the first church that was damaged by fire was in Pasadena, but shortly thereafter, the Resurrection Church that serves the community of East Los Angeles was hit. Now, that church was a fabric of the community since 1923. So the act of arson really strikes a much deeper chord. Many view this house of worship as a safe area where violence cannot affect them. So arson destroys more than the building itself. It can devastate that community that really depends on the church, and that's no matter what faith. So the Resurrection Church fire really was a turning point. This criminal had been vandalizing churches now for a couple years, and there was two key points. He escalated again using fire now as his weapon, and two, he targeted churches in Los Angeles, which is their territory. So immediately after that Resurrection Church fire, your LAFD activated the task force with a modification this time. They assembled over 25 personnel from multiple agencies and started to include them in the task force. And so they really had a heck of a posse with them, as you could imagine. It was LAPD, Glendale Police and Fire, Pasadena Police and Fire, ATF, LA Sheriff's, FBI, and the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office. And they were all supervised by the competent section captain, Scott LaRue. So how did they actually catch this elusive criminal? Well, during analysis of surveillance video from several incidents, these investigators ID'd a vehicle that was seen at a previous scene. So now they're armed with a partial license plate as well as a vehicle description, and they began to canvass the area where one of the churches had been vandalized, and they ID'd the vehicle that belonged to the suspect. They also evaluated the suspect's social media postings, and there they were able to see that it contained similar religious statements that was found at the site of these churches that were vandalized. So the investigators set up 24-hour surveillance on that vehicle, and then in January 25th of 2018, that suspect was caught vandalizing the church in the central Los Angeles area and immediately was arrested. It's important to state, too, that the surveillance assistance that was provided from LAPD was very critical to capturing of the suspect, which was 25-year-old Christian Garcia. He was taken into custody, and the investigation revealed that he was linked to approximately 30 incidents in the cities of Fresno, Norco, Chico, and the city and county of Los Angeles. And the total estimated damages were nearly $800,000. So the suspect ultimately confessed to committing the crimes during a lengthy interview by the LAFD and Pasadena fire arson investigators. Then in January 29th, 2018, these three deputy district attorneys filed 22 charges of vandalism, arson, and commercial burglary, along with specific hate crime allegations. And so finally, in February of 2019, the defendant was found guilty and was sentenced to potentially 40 years in a state mental institution. And so we'd like to briefly read one of the certificates. On behalf of the members of the Los Angeles Fire Department, I extend our sincere appreciation for you for the diligent leadership during the investigation of church fires during January 2018 with the LAFD Interagency House of Worship Arson Task Force. Your leadership was demonstrated in coordinating and managing the LAFD members participating in the task force. Your contributions were instrumental in making an arrest, and your commitment is also a tremendous reflection of the Los Angeles Fire Department that gained justice for the cities of Los Angeles, presented this 19th day of February, 2019. And now we'd like to ask Chief Deputy Fred Mathis. Let's give them a round of applause.
Good morning. I don't think there's anything more sacred in the city of Los Angeles than the churches, the temples, and the other places of house of worship. They certainly are sacred to the people in the neighborhoods there. And one of the things about this event was the collaboration of different agencies that don't normally work together, but work together very efficiently and very determined to thwart this threat. So on behalf of Fire Chief Terrazas and the command staff, I want to congratulate the task force members here for your determination and for thwarting this threat. And very well job, good job, well done. Appreciate it. And now I'd like to turn it over to Chief Castillo.
Thank you, Chief. Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Mike Castillo, Battalion Chief from the Commander of the Arson Counterterrorism Section. Madam President, Commissioners, Chief Mathis, City Attorney, and distinguished guests. On behalf of the members of the House of Worship Arson Task Force, I'd like to thank you for recognizing their efforts and the work of the task force members. Although there were many, many people involved, I'd like to specifically recognize a few. As mentioned earlier, in '96, the House of Worship Task Force was created by the LAFD, and at that time it was basically LAFD Arson, LAPD, and ATF. We recognize this as a large-scale global incident, and thanks to Captain LaRue, he pulled us all together. It was his decision to make us an interagency task force, and it worked out well, and it's a model that we'll follow in the future. Investigator Les Wilkerson, who unfortunately could not be here today, his actions were instrumental in identifying the suspect. He actually had a partial license plate. He went to auto dealers throughout the city with a partial description of the car and determined what type of car it was. And he was instrumental with LAPD in setting up the surveillance, which ultimately caught the suspect. Investigator Mario Newt is our primary investigator for our churches, our house of worship. He rolls out to every incident, either accidental or deliberate, that we have at house of worships. Investigator Gaeta and K9 Blue were actually the persons who discovered the graffiti at the Resurrection Church that actually linked the suspect to other church fires. Fire investigator Rosa Tufts, who unfortunately could not be here due to family emergency. She's been embedded with the LAPD for over 7 years. She's the reason why we have such a fantastic working relationship with LAPD, Major Crimes Division, and Criminal Conspiracy Section, who also were instrumental in assisting us. It was a true partnership between LAPD and LAFD. Rosa will be retiring this April. As you're aware, she was recently recognized as a Firefighter of the Year, and I'm sorry she can't be here today, but she was instrumental also in this investigation. Our forensic photographer, Harry Garvin, who rolls out to all of our incidents. You know what they say about a picture is worth 1,000 words. Harry's pictures, his dedication to assisting our investigators documenting are critical in the prosecution. And also special thanks to Deputy District Attorneys Holly Harpham, Joy Roberts, and Rachel Bowers, who unfortunately couldn't be here. She's actually in jury duty right now. You know, the DAs put in 15-hour days. We have a unique set of DAs. They actually roll out to our incidents now. They're there firsthand, right alongside the investigators, guiding us, giving us advice, and it ultimately helps in the prosecution. So their hard work and partnership result in a successful prosecution. And I'd also like to acknowledge and thank Los Angeles County District Attorney Jackie Lacey for being here today. Lastly, the task force was nominated and will be receiving the prestigious 2019 Anti-Defamation League Sherwood Award for combating hate and bigotry. This is a award that's awarded once a year to law enforcement for specific incidents, and LAPD put us in for the award, and we received it, and we'll be receiving that on March 12, 2019 at the Getty Center. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Madam President, since we have the district attorney here, could we allow her to say
Yeah, I
something?
think that would be appropriate.
Good morning, Commission. Good morning, Ms. Commissioner Woods Gray, and to all of you. I'm here because I'm just really basking in the glow of this team. I know a little bit about this work. I was a hate crimes prosecutor back in 1998. These cases are difficult to prove, but they're very important because I often say you should be safe in the house of worship, you should be safe in a school, right? And so when something like this happens, of course, it shakes everybody in the community. The work as described by Mike Castillo is amazing, and just looking at this group, realizing it's 25 people and a dog, illustrates how much it takes to really get these cases together. They're not easy to prove. But I also would be remiss in not saying that it's obvious, since the defendant was sentenced to possibly 40 years in a mental institution, that we've got to do something to proactively address mental health, right? We've got to get in there before people destroy or burn, houses of worship. And it's just another example of a wake-up call to all of us that this is not an issue. Mental health is not an issue that we should ignore, that we've got to be proactive. And if we could just reach people before the police get involved, it would really serve our community well. But once again, I'm very, very proud of this commission. I'm proud of my deputy district attorneys. I know each one of them personally. They're hardworking folks. They're hardworking prosecutors, very committed and dedicated to the profession. And I didn't even know they were doing this work. I knew they were working hard, but I'm extremely proud of them. And I want to say congratulations to all the commission. And thank you for recognizing this work. It is important. Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
So, we have one public comment on 4A.
Okay.
So,
You want to do 4B and C first?
yes.
Okay. Move to adopt the recommendations of items 4B and C.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
So, 4A.
Okay.
Let's see. 4A is a report by the department on the First Amendment to Agreement C130336 with Corinne Bendersky for equity and inclusion and implicit bias training. So our first public comment is from Freddie Escobar, UFOT president.
Good morning, President Ibarra, Honorable Commissioners. Freddie Escobar, and I'm the President of the United Firefighters of Los Angeles City, Local 112, representing firefighter, paramedics, dispatchers, inspectors, and pilots of the Los Angeles Fire Department. While we have tried our best to support, to the best of our abilities, to support the current implicit bias program, we received a lot of calls and concerns regarding Dr. Berdensky's training. UFLAC and the LAFD are leaders in the fire service and serve as a model for many departments across the state and the nation for collaboration and inclusiveness. We strongly feel that our department needs someone who understands the uniqueness of the LFD and who can communicate to our members and staff. It is our belief that fundamentally we need to find someone who understands the LAFD and not simply cues from LA County. We want to thank the department and working in collaboration and being progressive. But at UFLAC, I'd be remiss if I didn't address this. We received a lot of calls concerning the training to our members in the field, and a lot of progress has been made since 1989, since I've came on the job. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question? Is it appropriate?
Sure. Yeah.
I just wanted to know, be clear. It's on the trainer, not the training.
It was the phone calls we received. It was regarding the information that was coming. I reached out to President Ibarra as well, and I didn't want to be biased on what phone calls I was given. I gave her names to reach out so she just wouldn't hear a one-sided version from UFLAC. Members that have been on the department for well over 30 years, and it was regarding the information that was being presented at the training at the time.
Okay, not the trainer. Okay.
Correct.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
Just a quick question, suggestion. I think this work is really important work in our department, having seen sort of cycles of change in other organizations, I think that there are often, as these things happen, there's going to be iterations along the way, and so I don't know whether this is the case or not, but I'm supportive of continuing with the work and intend to support this. My suggestion would be, if it's not already happening, that Ms. Bendersky, Dr. Bendersky, have perhaps an opportunity to meet with a few folks who may have critical, feedback for her, constructive feedback about how she could make her presentation better. Because I do believe that she's on the right track, and it may just be that it's helpful for her to hear directly from a small group of individuals who have been through the training to say, look, this is what landed and this is what may not have landed in the right way.
Right.
Can I ask Chief Mathis, because this came out of your shop?
Yes.
What was the response? And thank you so much for coming in.
Yeah. The implicit bias training, we did surveys for, first we trained all the officers on the one department in a couple different iterations. And 95% of the surveys that we got back were positive. We didn't expect to get 100%,
Right.
Knowing that the training is a little bit controversial. But, and if I may, I would like Chief Sesser, who coordinated the implicit bias training, to speak to that.
Oh yeah. Can I ask also, because and feedback basically, the points of contention and the controversial points, and if you could speak to what those were as well.
Good morning, President Ibarra, Commissioners. Linda Sesser, I'm the Executive Officer for Administrative Operations. So, yeah, as Chief Mathis was saying, Dr. Bendersky came on board last year, and she provided training, actually live training to all the chief officers, live training to captains, all the captains on the department. And then the third final phase of that training was to be basically a train-the-trainer program to train members below the rank of captain. And so in that process, there was feedback, and like Chief Mathis said, that overwhelmingly the evaluations from the class and the feedback was overwhelmingly positive. But there were members that did have concerns about the training, some of the subject matter, things of that nature. And so what the department did, in also listening to those concerns, is we've kind of regrouped, and we're looking at still moving forward, obviously, with the training, but in a different format. Dr. Bendersky is still involved in that process, and essentially here today, all we're doing really is extending her original contract, which was expired on December 31st, 2018. But because we haven't completed the training, all we're really doing is just extending the contract through June. Yeah. So she's still involved in the process. She has been provided feedback in regards to some of the concerns that members may have had about the training. I'll just emphasize it was a small majority, but obviously we want to, the goal of the training really is to speak to everyone. So even if part of our audience isn't going to receive a benefit from that training, then we need to look at that as an agency. So I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. I didn't want to cut you off.
Oh, no, that's okay. Go ahead.
No, I just want you to finish.
Well, so basically, we've regrouped. We're revamping the training. Bendersky is aware of some of the concerns, so we've rewritten a lot of the vignettes, if you will, that were being used, and going to basically have another rollout in a different format. And through that, we'll actually, UFLAC and the Chief Officers Association, everybody will see that format before it actually goes out.
Right. Okay. So a couple of things. First, I didn't hear that. Freddie was saying that they were opposing this. I think he was just voicing kind of concerns that he's heard from some of his members and that he's forwarded to me, so I've heard them as well. We've gotten at least one letter to the commission, and I believe that actually wasn't from a UFLAC member. It was from a chief officer, and I believe that was circulated to everybody in the commission. Mm-hmm. So the commission has heard, I feel like everybody in the commission has probably heard different aspects of it and has gotten letters and correspondence about some of the concerns. And so I second Commissioner Glazier's recommendation is that the feedback really doesn't need to go, it's good that we hear it, but Dr. Bendersky really needs to hear it because different members of the department have different levels of feelings about it, but a lot of their concerns were well stated and come from a good place. And I feel like what they were saying is that there was no acknowledgement of how much work this department has already done and how much evolution there has been. So I feel like she needs to understand that because until she does that, they're not going to be open to listening to her. So, and some of the concerns I kind of felt were not so well stated. But that's not, I kind of feel like she needs to hear from the people who have better, are coming from a good place. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah, no, absolutely. And as I was saying earlier, is that, the goal really is to provide a training that the members are actually going to benefit from. That's the ultimate goal. So if there are people that, were dissatisfied with the training, we need to address that. That's important. So we're now moving forward with a Bendersky has been told about the concerns. It has been a discussion on a number of occasions, so it's nothing new to her. But at least so far this process. So I think we're all in agreement on what needs to happen, and UFLAC and the Chief Officers Association will be involved before the final rollout goes out.
Right. I think that's important.
Right.
Bringing everybody on board.
Right. We need to bring all the stakeholders to the table.
Absolutely. But it is imperative. Look, I agree that the department, this is a very different department than when you got on in '89. I agree wholeheartedly.
And it's also a different department than LA County. I just think it is. So it's sort of, the culture is different. The amount of participations of minorities and women is different. And so you kind of need to tailor it to this department. That's kind of a lot of the feedback that I heard, and I don't think that's, I don't think that's incorrect. If that's what they're feeling, then, we kind of need to work with that.
So you're down to the last part of this training, the trainer, train the trainer.
Correct. The final phase is to basically to train the membership below the rank of captain.
And I think as long as you're aware of some of the concerns and you're going to try to work the concerns out, I believe that we should move forward with this because it is an important thing. And it's not just happening in LAFD. We see this training taking place throughout the country in all different kinds of departments. So that, and I believe that it should, but I think working with the stakeholders is an important thing. And so if you continue in that direction, I think that that's what's happening. And when they do the next training, can I attend?
Absolutely.
Let me know when it is?
Yeah, I think all of us would be interested because we've heard about it and none of us have actually been to it.
No, I went.
I think you did. Rebecca did.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't.
Yeah. It was, I mean, I come from a different place, so I don't work in the fire department, but it seemed, I went to the chief officers. I didn't go to the captains. But I also didn't go to any of the trainer portion of the training.
Oh, okay.
So that's something that I would really be a little bit more concerned about and would want to make sure that that's done and in a very sensitive manner, and also so that it's received effectively. And the people that are training, they have the appropriate training and the appropriate background to be able to manage this sort of training, which I think you guys are working on that as well.
Yeah, and I just want to. My last comment is this is hard work, and whenever there is a coming together to discuss something like this implicit bias, it always starts on a defensive posture, and I think the only way through that defensive posture is dialogue. And surveys are great. Surveys also paper over, literally, what people really think. And so I think there's no substitute for some of that in-person connection where you don't just read it on paper, but you actually see and hear and validate each other. Because otherwise, I think that defensive posture takes over on what can become a conflict but shouldn't be a conflict. But it goes to that defensive place of, you said this, I heard this, and now I can no longer hear anything else that you are saying. And we are working through this, and we should all feel good about the fact that there's an effort to work through this. And if there are people who are willing to sit down in person and talk in a way that feels safe, right? No one's being threatened with anything. It's just an open discussion. The process will get a lot better, and then you're going to start to have people who build trust, and that's really what allows for these things to move forward, in my experience. So I think it's good to keep going with the work and find that time to make that space available, and it'll move the department forward. So,
absolutely.
Yeah. Right.
Okay, so there's no opposition to this, as I heard it from Fred, from UFLAC. So
yeah, I got it.
We got it. But I think they want to be heard, and we're all agreeing that they should be heard. So.
Right, and I appreciate that you do come here and let us know your concerns as well. I think it's important.
Come a long way, and we're very progressive and we support it.
Right, and I think like Andrew was saying, or Commissioner Glazer was saying, that this is extraordinarily sensitive work, and none of us. I have taken implicit bias tests and have never been and have not pleased with my own implicit bias. If you've taken any of the Harvard tests, they're short, quick, and somewhat painful, just because of the culture and the structure that we live in this society, and sometimes seeing how that can play out, in your own work every day is difficult and painful. And that I will say that I do think that the concern here too, I do think this is extraordinarily important work, and I do appreciate everybody coming to the table to and willing to do this. This is not easy, but this work. My biggest concern actually was making sure that there was a processing time to get through this, because to have a training once and have it sit there, it's easy to jump in and then jump right back out and then be upset. But, you know, and I think maybe getting this is something that we can look at, getting the psychologists, you know, the UFLEX psychologists and the department psychologists on board to really kind of process this, you know, because there is a lot of fallout and a lot of feelings, as you had mentioned, you know, that come up that nobody really wants to acknowledge. I went to the LAPD implicit bias training, which was fundamentally different, and it was really powerful. And I saw the resistance at the beginning and at the end, how impactful it had been. But it was funny. Somebody started and they said, you know, I said, everybody has implicit bias. And the one guy said to me, he's like, I'm not a racist. So what he heard was that you're a racist. I'm like, no, we have implicit bias. And so how do we move this department forward? So I just appreciate everybody coming together and having this dialogue, and maybe we can work on, you know, more of a process afterward.
The key thing being that it's a two-way street, and it's not just, you know, one trainer telling you what you need to do. It's everybody being part of the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's what we're starting with this.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you.
And it's good to hear that information from the members.
Yeah.
Because this program will never be successful if you have distractors. And we want it to be successful and to carry on throughout, because the trainers, they'll have difficulty if they're distractors. And then the people overhead, they will never implement anything they've learned if they are distracted by and think that it's not what they really want to work with. So I'm glad to hear that we'll be working together and everybody will put in there, have input. And I like the face-to-face, as you said, because on paper you might write all kind of stuff and it may not be exactly what we want to hear, but you can talk about things and you hear different things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Good.
Thank you.
All right, so we can vote on
Okay,
this.
move to adopt the recommendation for item 4A.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
So our first regular agenda item is a report by the department on the tiered dispatch system update.
Hello again, Commissioners. Dr. Mark Eckstein, Medical Director, EMS Bureau Commander. Here to report on the update on our tiered dispatch system. As you know, the fire department moved from a commercial off-the-shelf dispatch system and implemented our own dispatch system in December 2014. With that, we overhauled our dispatch quality improvement section, put in place our own dispatch algorithms that the CAD uses to send resources, and we are continually evaluating the system. I'm very pleased to say that the implementation of TDS has been a resounding success. This is due to the ongoing professionalism, dedication, and expertise of our sworn firefighter dispatchers, and constantly evaluating the system. I want to bring to your attention some of the metrics that we've achieved with the system. And when we talk about tiered dispatch system, it's really a wraparound system. So it includes the series of scripted questions that our dispatcher call takers ask when someone calls 911. The goals of the system, again, is to identify those time-critical complaints, obviously ascertain and confirm the address and callback number, to get the minimal required information of the caller, place the caller at ease as much as possible, confirm that we are sending help their way, identify the need for dispatch for the dispatchers to provide emergency instructions prior to arrival of trained rescuers, and dispatch the most appropriate resources. And that's the concept of tier dispatch. We've also made a concerted effort to for our dispatcher call takers to recognize potential cardiac arrest, because the weakest link in our chain of survival was that particular aspect where our dispatchers with the old system were not recognizing a majority of cardiac arrests. And no matter how many resources we put in place and ongoing efforts to get our members out of quarters, navigating through traffic, it's rare. It's extremely rare to have a survivor if we don't enlist the help of bystanders to perform CPR and or use an AED prior to our arrival. The other aspect of the tier dispatch system, again, is creating and constantly modifying algorithms. So for once the call taker selects a dispatch chief complaint code, a specific algorithm is assigned and the computer-aided dispatch system sends the resources. As Chief Poyer mentioned, given just how busy we are, we dispatch approximately 850 to 1,000 EMS incidents a day and transport about 650 patients to the hospital. It's incumbent upon us to make sure we're as efficient as possible and only send the minimal number of resources, not just the minimal number, but also basic versus advanced life support. And we constantly are changing and modifying our algorithms based upon actual outcome data from reviewing electronic patient care reports. So on page 3 of the report in front of you, it shows the net effect of the changes of the algorithms on our resources, and that helps us provide recommendations to the fire chief in terms of determining which types of resources to augment in terms of funding and staffing. And also we're mindful of the fact that we typically get multiple calls in our busiest districts simultaneously, so-called collisions. So it's not just sending the correct resource to that incident, but having resources in place for the next 911 call in that area. Also on that page, you see some quantifiable metrics which really demonstrate that TDS has really been a resounding success. Our call takers now recognize well over 90% of working cardiac arrest and are enlisting the dispatchers to perform compression-only CPR. Call processing times have gone down by about 25% to our most time-critical calls, which we call immediate dispatches. And we've made a concerted effort to provide feedback to dispatchers and the members in the field. I also like to take this opportunity to recognize the outstanding efforts of our dispatch manager, Captain Tim Warfel. Tim, if you're in, so Captain Warfel is our dispatch manager. Part of the implementation of TDS was creating a position of a dispatch manager. We recognized there was a huge void, and we're very fortunate. Captain Warfel was a former dispatcher, so he has that street credibility to provide feedback from our quality improvement folks to the dispatch floor. And he also works very closely with Chief Calvillo and the command leadership at MFC and Information Technology Bureau. So in summary, the dispatch system is really the foundation of everything we do in terms of emergency operations. We have a lot of stakeholders. We're constantly refining the system to try to save lives, send the right resources, make changes when available. It's a very robust system that's dynamic. We control the questions our call takers ask. We provide timely feedback to our dispatchers. We solicit feedback from the field. We change the resources that we send, the questions that we ask. We're mindful of the community that we serve. The software has the questions in English and Spanish. There's always availability of Spanish call takers on the floor. We also have the availability of the telecommunications line. And again, we learn a lot because we have open dialogue with the members actually doing the work on the floor. And again, every metric we've set out to achieve, we succeeded. We're not resting on our laurels. Again, we continue to refine and improve the system. And arguably, other than the cardiac arrest benchmark, as I mentioned, one of the other metrics that shows the efficiency of our dispatch system is sending the right resources, meaning not oversending fire companies where only an ambulance is needed, or not sending paramedics when only EMTs are needed. And we've been able to significantly reduce that so-called over-triage rate from over 40% to a little over 20%. And we're continuing to work to even make that more accurate. I'm happy to field any questions the Honorable Commission might have.
Good job with this.
Thank you.
I remember how I thought it was a radical idea when you first proposed it, and I had a lot of trepidation about this, but it really worked out. So, I mean, and the numbers bear it out. So congratulations to you and to your team for the commitment to this.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, move to adopt the recommendations. This is, which item are we on here? 5A.
Second.
Okay. Moving on to
Oh,
5.
vote.
Oh, yeah.
Aye.
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 All in favor?
All in favor? Aye.
Aye. Okay.
5B is report by the department on the LAFD automated vehicle location status report.
Good morning, President Ibarra, Commissioners.
Morning.
Good morning.
Chief Mathis, City Attorney. Scott Porter, Chief Information Officer, Commander of the IT Bureau. I have actually two reports today. I'll start with the AVL report. I've asked Cap Morphle to join me for part of this. I've submitted my report. I'll just summarize a couple of the highlights here and then answer any questions. Back in April of 18, so just under a year ago, we took our first step into AVL. So this is where we're using resources' actual location to make dispatch decisions. And at the time, we consciously made a decision not to go all in. In other words, many departments would get a new CAD system or they'd turn AVL on and they'd sort of turn it on for everything, every type of call, every kind of incident. And we knew that that would really be overwhelming for our system. And we also knew that we didn't really know enough to make that kind of a bold step into this. So instead, we consciously focused in three areas. One was we wanted to implement AVL citywide so that we could get a really good sense of the infrastructure. Did we have the correct parts and pieces in place? Could they handle the volume of traffic and calls and decision making? Was our CAD able? Was the infrastructure really able? So that was our primary objective, first objective. The second was, could we pick an opportunity for a certain type of call that we would use AVL on so that, one, we would get a benefit of being able to better predict the closest unit using AVL, but two, also start to collect information about how does AVL call processing actually work in the real world in the LAFD, and what were sort of the opportunities for picking the closest unit and what did that actually mean. So we picked one dispatch algorithm that affected a number of calls, primarily where we're looking for a closest ALS resource to go by themselves. So that was algorithm 13, not that that necessarily means anything in particular, other than there was a good volume of calls. It's continuing to work today, and we're getting a lot of great information about it. And it's informing our decision about not only what the next algorithm is, but also how we might use AVL. For example, the algorithm looks for the closest unit, and if it doesn't find one, it looks for different types of units based on their distance away. So now that we're getting more precise information, we're making decisions about how long those distances are. And then the third area that we were really looking at, trying to understand, is where besides closest unit dispatch, determining where the units are at the time of dispatch, what other parts of the operation might benefit from AVL? In other words, our resource management. And I think this is the area where we probably found the most surprising information about just the awareness of units and where they are and whether they were moving and in what status. I think that has really informed kind of our next steps. So my report has a summary of those things. Our next steps are really to drill down on not only the algorithm that we've already implemented, but to make some decisions about the next algorithms, which obviously we're working with communications, emergency operations, and the EMS Bureau to make those decisions. But also some of the other operational areas where we might benefit from AVL. So before I finish and take questions, I'd just like Cap Morphle to speak briefly about the operational side of some of the things that we've learned. And not only is he our dispatch manager, but he had the pleasure of working Assad Day as a dispatcher this weekend. So this is all very fresh in his mind. Not that he isn't thinking about it constantly anyway. But Cap Morphle.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Madam President, Honorable Commissioners, Chief Mathis, Tim Werfel, Fire Captain, Dispatch Manager. I've had the pleasure of serving as the dispatch manager now for 4 years. And while I report to Dr. Eckstein in the EMS Bureau, I work very closely with Scott Porter and also with my other boss, Chief Calvillo at Metro Fire Communications. I wanted to just bring up a couple points. That I think the Los Angeles Fire Department was very responsible in the way we rolled out our AVL by only implementing one algorithm at a time. We've learned a lot in the last year. So as Scott mentioned, I had the pleasure of working as a dispatcher on Friday. being able to see our system working live on the floor. One of the benefits that we've had is our mapping. Dispatchers now can assess where resources are live on a map, where we didn't have that ability before. We do now with AVL. In addition, we're seeing a average response time reduction of 16 seconds on algorithm 13, which is very encouraging. It's exciting. We have several other algorithms that we would like to, introduce AVL to, but we're learning a lot. One of the things in our next edition of algorithm 13, we're going to be able to assess the distances between our resources. So currently we dispatch and you get the closest resource to an incident. If that resource isn't the right resource, we have to get a further away resource. An example would be we have to send a fire engine because they're the closest, but we really wanted an ambulance, a paramedic ambulance. So we have to send both. Now we have the ability to look at the distance between those resources. Today, if that engine is 1/10 of a mile closer, it's going. Reality is it probably doesn't need to because that ambulance is going to get there before them anyways. So we're going to look at that. That's going to give us the ability to assess that. And what that'll do is free up more resources for other runs, other incidents. One of the other benefits is just reducing the number of resources dispatched to the same incident. So with AVL, it's allow us to also reduce the number of resources. So is there any questions that I could answer?
That's impressive. 16 seconds.
Yeah.
The 16-second reduction is extremely impressive.
Yes, and then one of the outcomes that we weren't really anticipating is increasing our resource availability. We're able now to make sure that ambulances update their status when they leave a hospital because we can see them in motion on the map. So we're increasing our availability of resources also.
Hi. Really good work on this. I'm curious if you have enough data, and I'm interested to see how this would inform our wall time numbers. If it gives us, because you specifically call out a couple things that I know really would shed a lot of light on wall time. We haven't talked about wall time, I don't think, here in quite some time. So I would be interested. It's not for today because it's not exactly this item, but I'd be interested to have a more specific report using the AVL data on what the actuals are on wall time now. Because I know before it was, my guess is it was caught a lot up in
NAV.
In statuses and changing of status. And so that obviously the data is only as good as what's coming in. So now that we actually have the automated data, I would love to see that come back to us just to give us an updated picture on where we are with that.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Tim. Any questions for me about any of the other parts of this? I think, Commissioner Glazer, that wall time is an interesting one because it affects, first of all, defining it correctly is difficult, making sure we have a good definition for it. But this is a great example where changing some operational procedure in addition to having data, in addition to having new tools that AVL is giving us, is really important. So we do have some interesting numbers we can follow up with you in terms of a shift in the NAV times are down, considerably. HSP times are up, but then there's a wash, and then the overall unit availability and how that's affected. So we can get back to you on that.
Yeah, and then the other questions I'm wondering about is, I know one of the concerns on AVL is that if you have units returning home over a longer distance from hospital to quarters, and their typical route home is through a very high traffic area as far as calls go, that they can be pulled off and perhaps never make it back to quarters because they're always being pulled off. I know that the way you guys have dealt with that is by trying to limit the calls that pull people out to some of the highest risk calls. I'm just curious how that's going, and if your thinking has changed on that, or if that continues to be unevolving. I imagine that's part of the data you're collecting and thinking about.
It is, and again, it kind of goes back to this is really because we now have another tool in our toolbox. It goes back to operations, and the conversation has to be sort of an MFC, overall unit availability, an EOPS, overall sort of what is our position and posture, what call type. So we do look at it. I know that when we go to the next algorithms, we're going to be looking at this again because we'll also be looking at different statuses. And then the question, as you say, is going to be what types of calls likely are the most likely sort of calls that we would do this for. Obviously, we don't want units that are fully available and able to drive by an immediate dispatch, right? So we're all sort of in agreement on that. It's the nuance and the detail of when that happens. The other thing is as they're traversing large sort of areas, being able to sort of update where they are in their first in, because we're still in this hybrid of some calls are AVL and some calls are first in based, but AVL gives us a better sense of how to update the first in. So we're looking at all of that.
Yeah. Great. Good stuff.
Okay.
Thanks.
Good.
Good job.
Thanks. Okay, if I just stay here?
Yeah. We just need to vote on this.
Yeah.
And then
Move to adopt the recommendation for item 5B.
all in favor?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
So now you're back for LAFD Information Technology Bureau quarterly report.
Yes, thank you again for allowing me to talk about this. So, again, I filed the report. I will just give you a couple of the highlights. We've been really busy. I mean, it's a great thing. This year and last year, we were fortunate to receive funding for a number of projects in the budget. We're making really good progress on those. I know that last time I gave my report, there was some question about maybe more specifics about some of the projects. I tried to do that, but certainly can talk about anything that's here. These are just really the highlights. We're working on a number of other things besides what's in here, so anything that you have questions about, I certainly can answer. I wanted to highlight CAD, which AVL is really the major part of CAD that we've been working on, but we also just completed a very large upgrade of all the CAD infrastructure. So essentially, when they moved into MFC 8 or so years ago, there was new CAD hardware. That hardware is now 8 or 9 years old. So in the last 6 months, we've completely replaced all of the major components of the hardware and software of CAD. And now we're in the process of doing the so-called Windows 10 upgrade that we need to do for all the clients. So I was doing some research because we just started an IT Bureau Instagram account because we didn't want to be left behind. It sort of seemed silly for us not to have one. And I was doing some research on the CAD. The CAD is actually, the origins of this CAD, the actual traceability, is almost 40 years. So the fire department has done an amazing job of sort of keeping it going. And when you look at it as an outsider and you say, wow, this is really old, don't we need something new? But in fact, all of the guts of the system are all brand new, latest and greatest. We have an amazing team of dedicated, hardworking, professional developers that continue to make changes. It's still serving the department really, really well. And I know that that's something that when I was a consultant to the fire department, I looked at objectively. I'm trying to remain objective. And we're going to reevaluate this every couple of years. Is this still the right place for us? But we're making great enhancements not only to AVL. Our fire station alerting is on plan to be replaced, which involves a lot of CAD enhancements and changes. We have a relatively new, younger development staff coming in. And we don't have any single points of failure on the CAD team in terms of sort of people's ability. So we've done a really nice job with that. So it's really interesting how something, arguably in technology, I mean, the urge to replace this thing is great, right? We're just like, oh, we got to do something. but it's really serving us very well. Not without its faults. There's certainly some limitations, and we address those all the time. But in terms of CAD, I feel really, really comfortable that we're in a good place right now with our CAD system. We are in the process of a 911 phone system upgrade. This is sort of a normal thing that departments do. The PD is also doing a phone system upgrade. They're a little bit behind us on the schedule. They have 2 comm centers, obviously, to do, and they're also doing a major CAD upgrade. But the highlights here are that we're going to have essentially same vendor, not a lot of training difference, but a lot of capability difference in terms of future capability. And when the phone system upgrade is complete and PD system is complete, we're going to get rid of the so-called 30-second transfer time, which has been something that's been annoying to both departments for a very long time. But essentially today what happens is when the PD transfers a call to us, it actually leaves the city's system, goes back out to the 911 system, and comes back in. And it can be up to 30 seconds for that transfer. This will be the first time we're both in, and it'll be done in 2019. We're both on the same system. It'll be what they call a zero transfer time, so essentially on-network transfer. The other great thing is we don't have visibility for reporting purposes in the PD side of the call. So basically the call starts when we get it for reporting, which is great, but the caller could have been on hold on the PD side. They could have been on with the PD for a long period of time. And without having to make a special request, we'll have what they call end-to-end reporting. So those are the 2 major benefits. There's also some, it's just the new next generation platform. So there's some capabilities we're going to get in MFC. The other thing that's exciting about that project is it sets us up very nicely for when we start to talk about what our contingency plan is. What are we going to do with OCD? Where is our backup center going to be? The backup center question has been really difficult because of radio, CAD, and phone. Well, radio and CAD, we pretty much could go anywhere right now that we want to, and the phone has really been the sticking point. With this new phone upgrade, we're going to have some options with AT&T where we could essentially have 911 in the cloud, which means we could put it in a trailer, we could put it at a fire station, we could have a backup in a different location. So we have a lot of options we didn't have a couple of years ago. We also started just recently a preventive maintenance program on all of the IT, the technology components that are inside of all the vehicles. This is a huge win for the department. We essentially would make best effort to go around and repair equipment in vehicles, either by bringing them to Piper Tech or going out in the field to repair them, basically as people called. What that left us with was a lot of the technology in the vehicles. So we're talking about the radios, the mobile computers, the AVL equipment would be out of alignment, go out of service, have all kinds of problems. Well, now we've worked very closely with ITA. We have a preventive maintenance schedule. Much like the pump tests, every piece of equipment is scheduled to cycle through Piper Tech once a year. And when they go there, they will get updates of all the technology in the vehicle. So we're expecting this to be a great benefit for us. And already we've replaced hundreds of broken antennas and gotten radios that are not, sort of in alignment. And it's already been a benefit, and we've just started 3 or 4 weeks ago. We're still in the process of portable radio replacement. So remember last year we got funding on a joint purchase with LAPD. We bought 3,500 new portable radios. These are multi-band radios, giving the department quite a bit of capability. We just ended our first trial in Battalion 18, which was successful, and now we're on schedule to begin that replacement. The whole project to replace all the portables will be done sometime in September, October timeframe. Fire inspection management system, we're currently in the process, it was before you last week, to do a contract with a vendor for the brush clearance. Once that's underway, we'll be looking at a replacement system for the rest of fire prevention, so you'll see something on the agenda, on your agenda here in the coming couple of months for the overall fire prevention system. So that's coming up. Network staffing, we have an RFP out right now that we're evaluating. We had 11 proposals from vendors, and if you remember, this is really for vendors to come in to help us co-develop the next iteration of network staffing or staffing and scheduling. We did receive a couple of the responses from vendors of commercial off-the-shelf scheduling software, so we're evaluating those as well. But we expect to make a decision sometime around June, with development to begin this year and full replacement to happen sometime in 2020. Fire station alerting, we did receive funding in this year's budget to continue the replacement of the fire station alerting network. We started last year replacing the actual network that connects all the fire stations. That's in progress. We're working closely with ITA to replace old telephone lease lines with high-speed fiber that the city owns. And then the next phase of that replacement will be to replace some of the equipment that's inside of the fire stations that no longer is available for us. So we'll be working on that the remainder of this year. So that's all that's in my, and then I should say also the electronic patient care reporting software will be releasing an RFP in the next couple of months to look at the next generation of that. Those are the things in my report, but again, I'm happy to talk about anything IT related.
This is very comprehensive.
Thanks.
Yes, appreciate all the detail on here. Lots of good stuff happening in here. It's really great to see how far we've come every time you're up here. On the MDC mapping, are the MDCs beneficiaries of the improved maps that you've got?
Yeah, so that's yes, they are. Last year we finished up a replacement of the MDC system generally, the back end of the system, the infrastructure. And part of that was new software on the MDCs. And part of that delivery was a very basic map. And at the time, our main focus was just functional parity with the old MDCs, which didn't have a map. So it was sort of whatever the vendor had, we got. In this next round of the MDC software update, we'll be updating it so that the map source is the same that we're using in the CAD, the same that we're using for our new applications in our GIS unit. So it's a much more robust, feature-rich map. And also part of one of the things we're doing is this broadband trial where we're going to have sort of higher speed connectivity to the vehicle. And once we have that, we can do more robust things with the map, like show real-time incidents and units. We can do driving directions and all of that. So those are all part of our long-term MDC replacement. This year, we're going to be conducting a broadband trial of about 65 units in the field, and those will include an enhanced map, and then we'll sort of learn what features are the most valuable and what the new map ought to look like.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, broadband, pretty exciting. Start pushing some rich content down and
yes.
to the vehicles. Okay, good. I got to say, you like preempted a bunch of my questions, so great job.
That was my goal.
Well
Number
done.
one focus.
Yeah. Well done. Take a lesson, everyone. That's how it's done. That's right. All right. Thank you. I move to receive and file. Receive and file item 5C.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thanks.
Great. So our last item is this is my report. And so for most of the life of the commission since 2013, we've supervised the independent assessor through the vice president and myself directly. And so we've decided now, because there's different interests by various members of the commission on various audits, that it should be best done in compliance with the Brown Act. That means that it'll be done here. And we'll have public meetings, and we'll know what audits are upcoming. That's basically the only way that we can do it. Otherwise, it excludes certain people, and that's not really fair. Mm-hmm. And it's also, it's also in the interest of public transparency and public input. So that's the recommendation. Any discussion?
So is the last paragraph something new? Is that?
So no, it's basically the recommendation is that we just have it here. We're just going to have a report to the commission, and then the commission's going to vote. That's
Quarterly,
the recommendation,
right?
Quarterly.
And this is different from what we've been doing.
So usually it has been Commissioner Glazer and myself give direct guidance to the independent assessor, and also when the reports are in draft form. And what we get in the commission is we get completed reports, and you only get them when they're, we still won't have drafts in public, but we will have discussions on what audits should happen, and give guidance as to how or what emphasis they should have, so that it's not, right now what we get, or what Commissioner Woods-Gray sees is what the public sees at the end.
Which is your report.
Which is the report, which is at the same time that UFLAC gets it, that the LA Times gets it. And you don't have an input on whether it should have been done a different way, or you thought that you should have been looking at a different topic, or you had a particular interest in this, and, can she look at this, You just see the report when it's done.
So before the audit takes place, the discussion will take place here.
Right.
That's
So
what you're saying.
it's a report on upcoming audits, basically.
Report on upcoming audits.
And current.
Do we have?
Right?
Exactly.
Right. So
Current
just
audits.
right, as they progress. But let's say it's just a report, but not the.
It's not
do
the-
we see the?
It's not the actual report.
Okay. So
The actual reports are still going to be agendized because they will be full-fledged reports like we have now. So we'll always have that because we'll have the report,
Right.
and that'll be, so that part will continue. The only part that's different is that we have an agenda on all the reports that are in the hopper.
Oh, okay. So the initiation of an audit will still take place the way it's been taking place, or will initiate the beginning of audits will
They will-
take place here.
I'm going to say yes, except that they're going to be done here.
Okay, so if we will have an interest in an audit, then we will start it here at this meeting,
Then Woods
and then
Gray
it'll go
can have
forth.
a say, and Dr. Hara can have a say and can have input as well.
Okay, that's fine.
No? Okay.
I like
So-
transparency.
Okay.
Okay, so before we
Great.
vote, we have a public comment from Freddie Escobar, President of UFLAC.
Again, good morning, President Ibarra, Commissioners, City Attorney Iselia. Freddie Escobar, President of UFLAC of Los Angeles City Firefighters, Local 112, representing 3,300 firefighters, paramedics, dispatchers, inspectors, and pilots of the Los Angeles Fire Department. UFLAC stands in support of the Commission's recommendations to comply with the city charter and give prior notice to the Board of Fire Commissioners when there is a future audit of the department. We at UFLAC appreciate the transparency, Commissioners. We also believe that UFLAC should have a seat at the table to weigh in the near future on audits and topics that we believe fall outside the purview of the independent assessors that impact our members. As UFLAC President, I am committed to provide the same type of transparency and inclusion for the department to our membership to ensure their rights are protected. We thank you and look forward to continue the important work in cooperation with the department and the commission. Chief Mathis, please thank Chief Terrazas. Commissioners, thank you for the support and the transparency. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay.
Very good.
Okay, move to adopt the recommendation for item 5D.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
So we don't have any public comments other than that, so we
Move to adjourn.
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.